All right, I'm joined by managing editor Katelyn Tocci, Coach Tocci. I'm Michael Doyle, the editor-in-chief of Marathon Handbook, and it's just you and I today, Katelyn.
Yep.
Our colleague Alex Sear, he's going on a hero's quest right now. He's in the Alps in France, in the aftermath of UTMB, which just took place over this past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He's out there on the course, experiencing what the runners experienced last week. So he is not going to be calling in from a Starlink internet connection and doing the pod today. We'll catch up with him next week. It'll be really exciting, Katelyn, to chat with Alex next week when he comes back and he's seen the light and he's like, ultra trail.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
the future for me.
Can you imagine if he comes back from being a track star and wants to be a trail runner? That would be amazing. I would love it.
1,500 meters to the 100K or 100 miler. Let's go.
He doesn't even want to do a marathon with us yet, Michael.
He's just going to skip it. He's just going to
Yeah,
skip
just
it. He's
skip
going
it.
all the way to the top.
All right,
Yeah.
let's do it.
On today's pod, our big mega topic is fueling for the marathon. So we're going to talk about from here all the way in. Got fall marathons coming up. We'll talk about strategies for getting fueling right. We're going to hone in on race week, the mysterious carb load. What is it? Should you do it? If you're a beginner runner, should you be bothering with the math equation of the carb load? How to do it successfully? Is there such thing as too many carbs? And pre-race fueling, race day fueling, and then nailing like in-race fueling in particular, talking about the tricks of the trade. Katelyn and I will share our experiences, our knowledge, and our past failures so that you can learn from our mistakes. But first, speaking of Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, Katelyn,
Yes.
I figured we'd take a couple minutes to chat a little bit about what was a pretty astonishing race. Both the men's and the women's races were pretty exciting, but for very different reasons, I'd say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I thought we'd nerd out for a couple of minutes here and talk about kind of how UTMB continues to impose itself onto the running world as one of the great events in running, like full stop, whether you're a road runner, a track nerd, whatever. UTMB is a fascinating event, and I think this year's edition, particularly with the elite field, sort of reinforced that. You're an ultra runner.
Yes.
You were watching very closely. What did you think? How do you think the whole race shook out?
I think it was, as usual, super exciting. I mean, yeah, not everyone wants to run. Almost everyone wants to run UTMB as a trail runner. It's like what you want to end up achieving with, collecting the stones and running the qualification races and all that kind of stuff, because you have to do so many prerequisites to even be considered for the lottery in UTMB. And so it's a very anticipated day and everyone's watching it. And the elite fields were amazing. Both the women's field and the men's field were absolutely stacked with amazing runners, many of them coming in from doing a double from either Western states, even one or two, some from Hard Rock, coming from doing a 100-miler very recently. So the fields were stacked. It was going to be a very exciting. We did have some favorites thought out. And what was great was on one side, the favorite did end up smashing it with basically hardly any competition throughout the race, taking the lead from the beginning. Our Katie Scheid from the US, she was able to win the women's race, and she was always ahead of the pack. So she did an amazing job. And then the surprise on the men's side, which was incredible because the winner was not even listed on the starting elite field list.
Love it.
Love it. And you know what, Michael? This is what I love about trail. This is one of the things because you, in a 100-miler, you don't know. You can't choose favorites. You can have someone who is unknown to the trail running world and will just come in like Vincent Boyer came in and just smash it and just take the lead, surprise everyone. I can't even say he was an underdog because he wasn't really on a lot of people's radar. He wasn't mentioned in any of the pre-race podcasts. He wasn't listed on anything that we should keep an eye on him. And so this is what I love about Ultra Trail. You've got to be there pushing along, and you never know who's gonna win.
Yeah, I mean, not to be the road running comp guy all the time, but I'll do it here just for the sake of every listener out there. Where UTMB is sort of, it's like the New York or the Boston, and as you just described, hard rock or the Western states, it would be kind of like if you lined up New York, Boston, and I don't know, Chicago or Berlin, like back to back to back over the course of a couple of months, and then had all these runners show up and race all three of them. And we can talk about Katie Scheid in a second because she did something like pretty extraordinary. Yep. But this dude, Vincent Bouillard, who's a French guy in his 20s, not a sponsored elite athlete, in a moment where, maybe 10 years ago this was more common, but certainly now sponsorship is rife in ultra running. You kind of know who the top dogs are in every race. This would kind of be like not nobody, but somebody deep back in not the elite field out of Boston or New York, but like the person who gets like the free entry, but they don't get the free hotel, like they're like, yeah, we'll give you a bid because, you're a pretty good local, like marathon runner or whatever, but we do not expect you to win this race, winning the race. Right. Yep. So it's a huge upset. And the cool thing, we got a story on our site about like, who is Vincent Bouillard? Like, who is this guy? Tell me more about him. I highly recommend you read it. Our news editor, Jesse, put it together right after the race, because literally in our Slack, I was like, I typed like the headline, like, who is Vincent Bouillard, the guy who won UTMB? And so she got to answer that. Spoiler alert. I mean, I'll go through it a little bit here. Yeah. Not sponsored, as I said before. Hoka, not a Hoka athlete, a Hoka employee. So Hoka, the headline sponsor of UTMB, sponsors a ton of athletes in this field. I don't think they were thinking somebody who works for them as a product engineer was going to win UTMB, but like, I guess all the better for it. Like, great story for them. What's cool about him is, unlike in the women's race, which we'll talk about in a second, he's sitting back in the pack, like 10th. Like, I think something like 9th, 10th place in the first half of the race, just sort of like biding his time, getting comfortable. By all accounts, it was a pretty tough weather day, pretty warm weather day. So challenging for the athletes for sure. And he designs the Hoka shoes that Jim Walmsley wore, and that he wore last year to win the race. He was wearing a pair of shoes that he worked on himself as a product engineer for Hoka, lives in France, trains there, and then kind of like works his way through the field and then dominates in the second half. Only the third guy ever to run under 20 hours. So he ran 19:54 and 23 seconds to win the race. And only Walmsley last year. And then the course record was set by Kilian Jornet, the great Kilian Jornet, the Eliud Kipchoge of ultra running. And so they're the only three people to ever go under 20 hours in this event. So like a crazy day for this guy. I mean, super cool story.
Yeah. And in his interview, and what a nice guy. Like I listened to a post-race interview, and of course the people from Iron Fire were like, oh, this is the first time we've spoken with you, because they weren't on, he wasn't on anyone's radar. And that was just so nice. It was just such a great interview with him and you could just see him when he came through the finish line. He like has his hands on his head. He's just like, what just happened? What did I just do? And it was really nice listening to his interview and getting to know him a little bit and about his race strategy and just like trying to run his own race. But when he started to pass people and he started creeping up, it was about halfway through the race that he was able to get into first place when he passed Jim Walmsley. He was about at the halfway mark, but he was just picking people off in the uphill. And he said, I just felt great. I just felt so strong. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to push and push and push as far as I can. And, the second place was also a surprise. Someone from France, Baptiste, it was his name. And he was also someone that, just wasn't someone that was, spoken with as much or interviewed. Another one where the interview after the race was, oh, we haven't spoken to you before either. Just these two really great guys. Having a great time out there and working really hard, and their hard work and perseverance paid off, because a lot of the other people that they ended up passing during the race also ended up dropping out. And so they just, from the hard work and perseverance, they just really, really shone through. And just to mention, fourth place was someone from German, Hannes, but the fifth place runner was Lula, which I don't know if you guys remember when we spoke about Hard Rock. He was the runner who won Hard Rock, so he came in and was able to get a fifth place in UTMB. So he was one of the names that we more recognized. But just like an amazing story. Hoka's got to be psyched. Even our employees are winning the top races in the world.
Yeah. And I mean, too bad we don't have Alex here right now, because we could do a little bit of a shoe nerd out here, but just bodes really well for Hoka's trail running super shoe stock here. I think he was wearing the Tecton. I think he was wearing the 2.5, not the 3, which it's always interesting when the previous generation of a shoe wins a race instead of the current sort of supposedly most cutting edge one. But, very good for Hoka in that regard for sure. And so on the women's side, kind of totally different story.
Yes, completely.
Katie Scheid, who is a favorite going in, she won Western States only was that a few weeks ago almost, it feels like, and wasn't even sure she was going to race, and decided to do it. And then she just opens up this massive lead on the field in the first 40 or 50K. She opened up I think it was a 30-minute lead on the field, expanded it out to I think it was, I was jotting it down. I was 40 or 50-minute lead at one point. And then she just sort of held on. They kind of the field was sort of hunting her a little bit, but she just had such a massive lead in the second half that there was no catching her. And she ends up winning and setting a course record in the process, which is pretty incredible. So she runs 22 hours, 9 minutes, 31 seconds, beating the previous record, which was set by the GOAT, Courtney Dauwalter, who had a 22-hour, 30-minute, 55-second performance. So, I mean, what a day for her. And talking about lead from the front, big risky move to make. But again, sort of not to road running or trackify this, but it would be the equivalent of just getting out in a huge lead in the first half of a marathon and then just challenging everybody in the field to try to close the gap on you. And it's just impossible in a race like that.
Yeah, absolutely. She pulled ahead really early. She just had a super strong lead. And she said in her post-race interview that she got the vibe from some of the crowd and maybe think that she was starting out too fast. And she said from the very beginning that she was very confident with her splits. She had planned it out very well, and that she knew that she was going to go out hard and go out at this speed. And she felt confident with the speed. So she wasn't worried about it, but she said she felt some vibes maybe from others watching her pass by the aid stations, that maybe they were a little worried that she was pulling ahead a little too strong. I mean, what an amazing job, especially coming off Western States. I mean, to me, she's a machine that she was able to do that and break that record by so much. And it was great to watch the rest of the podium kind of creep up there, because we had mentioned Ruth Croft from New Zealand and Canadians, Marianne Hogan, which I was really excited to watch both of them. And they both had an amazing race. For a bunch of the race, Marianne Hogan was in second place. She took a spill. She broke a finger. Which she said, she was just going to keep pushing on as hard as she could. And in her post-race interview, she said that Ruth Croft just zoomed by her. She said, they just all had such great stories to tell after the race. She was just I was giving it all I could. I was going as fast as I possibly could. And Ruth just came by and zoomed right by me. And so that was a really great podium of three very strong runners. They were all on the elite list. They were all thought to be able to get podium positions. And so the difference between the men's race and the women's race is that we did see kind of what was predicted. And the men's race was just completely off script, which is, again, what is so cool about ultra running, because you really never know what's going to happen.
So I'm gonna bait you into saying something on Mike here, but we were talking before we hit record on the pod about the dropout rate. Now, I mean, I looked overall the field. It's about 2,700 runners entered, and I think about 1,700 finished. So a slightly higher dropout rate than your overall average if you're going to kind of like to go year by year, like maybe a slightly higher ratio than usual. But this is an event that's got a cutoff. It's a very hard event.
Yes.
Weather plays a huge factor. So you're not going to get everyone finishing. So that kind of dropout rate is, I guess, perhaps to be expected. But it was a different story in the elite fields.
Yes, it was.
What's up with that?
Yeah, I have in front of me. I was looking at it yesterday. The elite start lists. And on the men's side, the red X's through how many of the elites ended up dropping out. And it was 73% of the elite start list ended up dropping out. And for our loyal listeners, we recently had a podcast about the DNF and about how to avoid DNFing and why you DNF and why you don't DNF. And of course, we don't know the stories of all of these athletes, but it seems like quite a large percentage. The women were 45%. So it was a much lower percentage, but still, you're getting up to about half the elite field women dropping out in the race, 73% men. And you wonder as to why, some of the post-race interviews that I heard of some of the men or women that had dropped out had said, yes, this was hurt, or they were coming off of an injury or something like that, which I don't know. I would really not take on UTMB if I was previously injured. If I wouldn't go in with an injury. So I think that's something, this is just such a bear of a race to take on with an injury. And, maybe they thought they were going to be able to get through it, but it's just such an incredible feat to try to get through it. So we're not exactly sure why a lot of these men or women ended up dropping out throughout the race, but some comments were on the legs of tired legs, or their head just got to them and they weren't able to push through. And, ultra trail running is all about really trying to work the mind. And so, I think that's maybe something that affected a lot of runners that maybe, Michael and I talked about, but you got to push through. So the dropout rate was a little disappointing, maybe from starting to move back in the pack and so on. They get a little, people can get a little discouraged. And I don't know if that factored into it kind of more than the injury side, just speculating. But I've been in the trail running world for a lot of years. And so I've seen a lot of dropouts and a lot of people talking about why. And really your mind can get to you in trail running. And unfortunately, if you can't beat your mind, you can sometimes need to take a step off the course because, you just can't push through.
I think you're being too kind, Katelyn. I think you're being gentle. It's like when you're hyped as the guy who's supposed to win the race, and then you get passed by somebody who you're like, I think I know that guy because he works for the company that designs my shoe.
He
and then
made
you're
my
like,
shoe.
My knee is starting to bother me. Maybe I'm going to step off the course now. I don't know. It's a bad look. Yeah. All that to say is we don't know what's going on with people with injuries. And also we saw this with the Olympic marathon, right? It's there's contractual obligations. We don't know what these contracts say. They could say, if you don't start UTMB, you get $0. You start UTMB, you get a couple $1,000. You run halfway, you get a couple $1,000 more bucks. You place on the podium, you get several $1,000s.
Right.
We don't know the details of these contracts. And that's obviously can be a serious point of pressure for an athlete. But ultimately, it's always kind of a bad look when it's you're having the quote unquote bad day at the office and then you DNF instead of finishing 9th, 12th, 25th. 36,
push through. It's the last race of the season. It's the biggest race of the season.
Come on. Just get it done. Come on. It's just 20-ish hours in the Alps. You'll be fine. Just get it done.
Enjoy the views. Anyway, so I mean, just I guess a little disappointing because we really wanted to see those runners and how they were going to do, and we wanted to watch them for a longer period of time during the race. So it was kind of disappointing and a shame that they weren't able to make it through. But however, it made for an extremely exciting and amazing men's race that we weren't expecting. So that made it super fun. And it was, as always, UTMB never disappoints. It's always a fun race to watch.
Indeed. Now, so we'll make sure to tune in next week when we bring Alex back from the Alps, and he can report back as to like what the weekend was like, because he was there. I think he showed up just as the races were wrapping up and has been doing an event there this week. So he's going to do a vlog about it too, which should be a lot of fun. It'd be like
great.
A roadie tracky guy hits the UTMB course and hilarity ensues. All right, let's pivot right into our main topic of the pod. Marathon fueling. We're going to go through it. Here's the structure. Here is the, I'll set the table for everyone. We're going to go into talking about pre-marathon fueling. We'll back it up. We'll talk about kind of the overall, a 30,000 foot view, a bird's eye view of fueling, what the importance of it is, whether or not it's meaningful for you, even if you're, even if you're a beginner, it's your first marathon and your goal is perhaps just to finish the race. Does fueling matter? And all the way through to if you're, have a very intense time-based goal, how do you nail that fueling according to that time-based goal? And then we'll go through timing, what pre-race meals look like, how to get the fueling right, how to get that night before meal right, carb loading, what is it, what the science of it is, how to get the numbers right. Is there such thing as too many carbs? And then we'll go into race day as well. Okay, so let's talk overall first.
Packed show. It's packed today, huh?
Yeah. Like Katelyn, you're the school teacher and you came out. Yeah. You came up with the outline for this one, pasted it into our Slack, and I looked at it and I'm like, oh man, this is complete. This is detailed. So let's talk first about the importance of marathon fueling. Like, I guess I'm sort of showing our hand here. It's really important.
Yeah, right.
It's a key factor to having success in the marathon. Let's talk through how you develop a good routine. So let's talk about timing and composition of the pre-race meals. So what's your approach?
Well, I think first of all, I just kind of wanted to mention, to get it out there, that, using nutritional strategies and even day-to-day stuff and diet for a runner and how many calories you need, it's just based on so many different factors, right? You've got to think about, well, what's your resting metabolic rate? What's your daily activity like? Do you have a job where you sit down for the day? Are you a teacher, as I used to be, and I was walking around all day? Body composition, even thermogenesis, like training, your sessions.
A lot of fancy words.
Your environment. I live in the heat and the humidity. So there's so many things that go into putting together your nutritional plan day to day and racing and running. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because I feel like if you want to take running really seriously, checking in with a sports nutritionist is super important. I just went to mine yesterday and it had been a while. I did.
Good timing.
Yeah.
Is this on purpose, maybe?
It was so funny. I guess I must just have had this topic on top of mind because I had seen my nutritionist recently, and I just went in for the checkup yesterday to, see how everything was going. And, I'm heading for a really big race next month. And so, the calories got to come up, the calorie count has to raise. So, you got to think about all these different factors when you're figuring out what to eat. And so I think that if you get a chance to see someone, that would be really great, because they're going to do a ton of different tests, on you, and ask a lot of questions and figure out what you're doing weekly, day to day, to figure out what you need to fuel. But of course, fueling is number one. I mean, if you don't have enough calories, if you don't have to get through your training or to get through your racing, you can just come face to face with a lot of fatigue and not perform at your best. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. Maybe get some help from a professional nutritionist if you can. But Michael and I, are going to give you a ton of information today that at least can be some general guidelines that you can start with, and then go ahead and make adjustments as you need. Because you can think about, first of all, maybe just your day-to-day stuff. If we look at a bunch of the research, I mean, there are so many different approaches to day-to-day nutrition. And I know that, I even have some athletes who are doing intermittent fasting, low carb diets. But if you really take a look at most of the research, most endurance athletes or high-level endurance athletes are doing a pretty carbohydrate-based diet, right? So if you think about, maybe 60% of their calories are going to be carbohydrates, right? And protein, maybe it's going to be 15 to 25 for fat, 15 to 25. Those can probably vary a little bit, but if you watched Sprint, you saw just the carbs that they were eating throughout the series. So
sigh,
all the carbs. So I think
to be 21 again. Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, I think that I probably don't follow quite as high of a carb intake, maybe about 50% or so, but I think that that's around, the ballpark, somewhere between 50 and 70%. I don't know. What does your day-to-day diet look like, Michael?
I mean, I try to be varied in my diet. I live in a running household. My wife and I both run pretty seriously. We're recreational runners. We're not elite athletes, but we both run a lot. We both run every day. We've both marathon training seasonally, and but we also have a small child. So, it's not like it's training camp 24/7 at the Doyle household, but a balanced meal. We are meat eaters as well. So I think back actually to a pod we did maybe a month ago or so, where Alex discussed a little bit about a video that he produced for our YouTube channel, where he tried to live the Andrew Huberman way of life, blah, 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 for 30 days. This YouTuber / podcaster / scientist at Stanford. And one of the things that Alex did to really kind of like change his approach to things was to diversify his diet, and try to get his plate sort of having 3 different quadrants to it and having a lot of color on the plate. And I would say that when in doubt, like if you don't want to get scientific about things, and I don't really get scientific about this stuff, I'm not measuring food. I'm not counting calories. I don't even own a scale. We don't have a scale in my house. So I have no idea what my body weight is at any given time, and I don't really care. But I look at our plate. I do a lot of the cooking in the house. I look at what I'm producing in the kitchen, and it's like, make sure you've got some green, make sure you've got some color, make sure it's not this just giant beige plate, which is, you can fall into that pretty easily. It's really easy to make carbs. It's really easy to make a pasta dish and then, kind of do that over and over again. So for me, it's all about just like color, variety, and you kind of have to backtrack that and think about that when you're doing your grocery shopping.
Yep.
Age-old hack is to like really focus on, I don't know how many people actually even go to the grocery store anymore, but like imagine the grocery store in your mind when you're ordering food online to be delivered to your house, or however it is you get groceries in 2024. The perimeter of the grocery store is your friend, the produce section, the fresh foods, dairy, meat, all that stuff on the perimeter. The boxed items in the center, less so,
I think that's a great way. I think that's a great way to look at it. That's pretty much what I do. So I am following a little bit more of a specific plan right now. But to be honest, once you learn
please tell me what it is, because I'm gonna copy it, because I basically just admitted that I have no plan, and I just kind of have been doing this sort of like on feel for 15 years. But
to be honest, Michael, it sounds, it's really a varied plan, and not doing something so specific, like trying to cut a specific macro out of a protein, fat, or carbs, and trying to be low on something. Years and years ago I did, and this is just for people out there who are trying like low carb diets and that sort of stuff, and keto. When you take the carbs out of your diet, and there are some people who are amazing at metabolizing fat, right? And we'll get into that a little later as well. But some people are really great at it. But most of us, for that fast, quick energy, we really can use those carbohydrates for our glycogen breakdown and all that stuff. So it's great to fill up on those carbs. If you're in a glycogen depleted state, right, and you're not taking in a lot of carbs, and you're doing keto or something like that, which is what I tried maybe about 8 years back, I could run slowly for a great long period of time. I was doing some ultra training with this, but I could never do a speed workout, or I could never feel like I was strong enough to do so. So just when you think about that, maybe you can try a couple of days, a week of doing that low carb diet that you're on, or keto diet, and then giving a chance to carbs and see how you feel, and see if
give carbs a chance.
Give carbs a chance. Oh, I like that. We could write a song. And see if and see if your performance, or you just feel better from kind of changing that energy source while you're running. So I think this is why and that's what I'm just saying, most endurance athletes, I think, have a pretty carb heavy diet, kind of thinking of day to day. And then now when we're going to start going into, breakfasts and pre-run snacks and all of that, which we did talk about on a previous podcast, like before we get to the marathon, the fueling during the marathon, you're going to see that most of what people eat is going to be pretty carb heavy. And I think that's what, we spoke about on that previous podcast. So Michael, I'm going to start taking some notes. What do you eat, drink in the morning? Remind us, before a run or race? Both. That would be good to know both.
Okay, so first of all, they're kind of the same thing. I see when I lock into a season of marathon training. Okay, so we're going back, 14, 16, 18, however many weeks your training plan is. And I like to follow a training plan. I like the structure of it. And I think it's essential, especially if you have ambitious goals. So I begin week one, I'm not obsessed with it, and it doesn't have to be perfect on week one, but I begin thinking about what the end goal is going to be and how I'm going to fuel for it. And I begin practicing it. So even if my very first long run, week one, is only say it's like 16 or 18 kilometers, 10 miles, 12 miles, something like that. Yeah. Say it's a baby long run. It's a beginner. I still approach it the way I would approach marathon morning. And that is to say, and I have a tried and true method on marathon morning, because you got to get everything working in your favor. We're not going to talk about poop. I promise.
I was like, we're on the way again to talk about it.
We're going towards, no, we're not going to, okay. Caitlin, we're not talking about poop.
Put it aside.
Okay. What I do is I just think about my digestive tract. I think about the fuel I want to be putting in my body for race day. It's a top up at that point, because everything the night before, the 24 hours before, is the lead in, is the energy that you're putting into your body for the long run or race day. And race morning is a top up, but you need to time it properly, because the last thing you want to have in your mind when the gun goes off in a major marathon is like, when's the first porta potty stop, right? So I never want to see a porta potty ever in a race. Right. And I've successfully avoided a porta potty for 15 years. So I'm doing something right. And so I wake up like 3 hours usually. I've experimented. I've pushed it all the way to 90 minutes before a long run. 90 minutes is too tight. 2 hours is sort of the cutoff for me, but it's between 2 and 3 hours before my long run. I set an alarm, I get up, and I go through my morning routine, which is turn on the coffee machine. I'm a coffee guy. Coffee is part of sort of my overall routine. My body reacts to it. It's looking for the caffeine in the morning. It's it helps with the digestive tract, as any runner who drinks coffee knows. So I get a glass of water. I get like 500 mils of water going, and I get a coffee brewed, and I get the toast. I got the toaster out. Usually I put it out the night before. I put down a couple pieces of toast. I put a little bit of butter on it, because I'm not some people are really worried about like introducing too much fat, that sort of thing, on race day or before a long run, because they're afraid it's going to throw off their stomach. I think I have a little bit of an iron gut, so I'm pretty flexible with that. Butter, some sort of sugary something on top to kind of top up the carbs. So like honey, or jam, whatever I have in the house. I'm not picky about it. I've even gone cinnamon and sugar when I was desperate. So I sprinkle something on top or spread something on top. I have 2 pieces of toast with something on top and a cup of coffee. And I eat that about 3 to 2.5 hours before my long run. So if my long run is at 9, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm getting up. I'm probably eating that stuff by like 6:20, 6:15, 6:20. And I'm sipping water the entire time. If it's a really hot and humid day out, if it's a summer long run, maybe that water is less water, more like, I'll go with, like, for myself, I like Morton, the fancy carb-based fueling source, fueling system, whatever they call it. And so I'll mix up a water bottle, and I don't measure obsessively, but I keep kind of track of how much fuel I'm consuming on the morning before a long run. And I'll drink usually 2 bottles before I head out. So it's like I take in like a liter of fluid plus the cup of coffee before my long run. And I do pretty much the same thing on race morning. The only caveat being, of course, the challenge of, especially if you're traveling for a race, you really have to think about where you're going to get this stuff from. Like, Dunkin' Donuts is actually your friend on race morning in most major American cities, because Dunkin' Donuts, unlike Starbucks, some Starbucks will open up at like 5 in the morning. Think about this. Chicago Marathon. I'm doing Chicago this October, and I went through this in 2022, and I think I've done Chicago. This will be my 5th or 6th time doing Chicago. There's a Starbucks everywhere in Chicago, of course, and also Dunkin' Donuts everywhere, and a litany of other options. But a lot of Starbucks don't open until like 5 or 6, and the race starts at 7. And if I want to keep my routine, I got to get up at 4. So that means that I have to find a place that I'm going to get let's say a bagel with some honey on it, and a coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's a challenge. Now, maybe you have it in the hotel. That would be awesome. But in my case, I had to, like, in 2022, when I last ran Chicago, I had to like venture out into the city at 4 o'clock in the morning to find a coffee and a bagel. And Dunkin' Donuts was open 24 hours. So that was good. It was very close to where I was staying. So these sorts of things, these little things you got to think about. And if you get the routine going during practice, during the weeks leading up to it, your body will respond to it. You know what will work and what doesn't work. Maybe 3 hours is too much time for you. Maybe only needs 2. And that's amazing. That means you get to sleep longer than I do on race morning, right? But you just kind of tinker with it. You figure it out, and you figure out kind of what your jam is, what you like to eat on race morning. But I go like pretty light, pretty carb centric, very simple, cup of coffee. And for me, it's mostly about hydrating in the morning and getting kind of the system going and getting everything settled, peeing a whole bunch of times, and then making my way to the starting corral. What about you? Now that I've shared.
No, but to be honest, I don't have to add much, because I'm surprised, Michael, but our routines are very, very similar. Very, very similar. I'm the same thing. I need to do 3 hours before. Bagel and honey is my go-to. When I'm traveling, the days before, I will literally just buy it. I won't get a toasted bagel. I won't go look for a Dunkin' Donuts early in the morning. What I'll do is I'll get it the night before, and I'll just have it in my room if it's a hotel, or of course nowadays that the Airbnb situation is amazing, because then usually you have kitchens, right? So you can prepare your stuff with ease, rather than a lot of hotel rooms that maybe you wouldn't have all of the amenities that you would need that an Airbnb would have. So I do go out before, and I bring my bagel with me and my honey. And if I can't toast it, I don't toast it. I just, eat it as is, the simple carbs, stick to the simple carbs, just like Michael. And the other first thing I do is drink a nice tall glass of cold water. I don't do the coffee. I don't need the coffee. That's really the only difference. If someone's having coffee, I could have a cup of coffee. It's not going to affect me either way, but I usually don't have it before. But 3 hours too is, got to get up early. And just to add the only thing that I would add to it is that I do take along, and this can go more when we speak about the race strategy, but I do take along a gel or something for about 20 minutes before the race, because I feel like 3 hours is also kind of a long time to then not have anything and to wait until you've already started the race to begin fueling. So I know we'll talk about that, but it still kind of counts as my pre-routine because it's before I start running. So I'll have something with me, like an extra gel that I know I'll take while I'm in the corral or while I'm just waiting at the start line. And, to get like an idea of ranges, if you go through the research and you want kind of to know, but how many carbs should I eat, Katelyn? I don't know if you want kind of an idea.
Yeah, let's do it.
There are always wide ranges for everything, but maybe if you think about like 1 to 4 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight. So, I know that it seems like a large range, and it is. So what you really need to do is, like Michael's saying, that was the best tip we can give you today. Start trying out your stuff from the first long run of the season. We can't say anything more gold than that. And so if we're starting out our first week and we realize, no, I could have used a little more. No, I felt full. I could have used a little less. So you tinker between that like 1 to 4 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight and kind of figure out what that is. But, a bagel and honey works for me. Toast for Michael, and if I usually am running in hot weather here, so I will drink. It might not be just water. I love Propel packets. I'll stick one of those Propel packets in there.
Okay,
it won't have carbs, but it will have electrolytes. So at least I'll be hydrating. And I want to get into electrolytes today. I think it's important a little later. But I will usually start the day, instead of with a glass of just cold water, it will also have like a packet of Propel in it. So I get some sodium. I think it's about 250 milligrams of sodium. It's not a ton in each of those packets. So that in about 500 milliliters and kind of get going. So that's so Michael, we're pretty aligned.
We're aligned.
We didn't talk about this
so far,
before.
So good. No, we didn't. We did not in the show notes beforehand. We did not in our outline. We did not indicate what our thoughts and approaches were. I think we might diverge when we talk about in-race fueling.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we'll diverge, but because I do something somewhat eccentric, I think, by contemporary standards. But let's backtrack a little bit beforehand, because I think one of the great mysteries of the marathon is carb loading. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about carb loading as its own unique miniature odyssey, its own weird experience. But we can talk about kind of race week.
Yeah.
Did you do anything different at all race week? So like say, okay, you got Boston coming up in April.
Yep.
Just put the nerves in you right now, because you qualified. So hopefully they'll accept your application.
I hope so.
I always like that. I always like that part of the pomp and circumstance of Boston. You have to submit an application to be accepted to run the Boston Marathon. Oh, yeah. So say you're running Boston in April, which I'll look at. You should be, Katelyn. Race week. So early or mid-April. You're back in your hometown. Yeah. You're in Newton. You're doing your easy runs up and down the hills.
Yes, I will be.
You're acquainting yourself with heartbreak for the 7 days beforehand. Do you do anything differently? In terms of eating? I know one of the big question marks has always been alcohol. If you're someone who drinks a glass of wine or has a couple of beers here and there, do you abstain in the week or month beforehand? And is there anything else you do differently in terms of your diet in the week leading up to the marathon?
Okay. I think the week leading up, I just take better care of myself, thinking about, I think Michael, like you said, you have an iron gut. I don't. So I have to be a little more careful, especially if I'm visiting and I'm eating in unknown territory or just places that I'm not used to, and to be honest, even if you're going and being in a different country, food's processed in a different way. There is differences in everything. Water that you're drinking out of the tap, anything can kind of affect you a little bit. So I always feel that when I go up and I visit my family, my stomach is just a little off. It just makes a lot of noise. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I'm like, what is happening? I think it's just, the change. So I just try to keep it really simple, but I'll keep my kind of day-to-day diet up until just about 48 hours before. My nutritionist has me doing the carb load either about 2 to 3 days before. And I've been doing it, I've been doing it about 48, 36 hours beforehand. And with a carb load, I think that we need to be careful about not overdoing it also, because it's not like you just want to eat and eat and eat and eat a lot more food and a lot more carbs. I think what
Yeah.
I do is I more replace, right? So I replace the protein and fat with carbs in that couple of days before. And then the one day before, the 24 hours before, I will only eat simple carbs. So if I would give you, I mean, it's probably going to sound like a super boring menu to a lot of you, but I'll have, I just want to be safe. So I'll do again, like a bagel and honey or toast or even French toast with maple syrup. I'll take advantage of it and, eat something. I'm a sweet tooth. So eat something I really like, have a couple chocolate chip cookies throughout the day. I'm a cookie monster, like number one. Sandwich for lunch, make it my own, get a baguette, or whatever, some bread, very, very little protein in it, but some things, some ham and cheese or something like that. It's very bread-based sandwich. And then, snacks again in the afternoon will be bread-based. If I have some like toast with, I don't know, Nutella, more cookies. I probably shouldn't be eating so many cookies, but I just take advantage of it. And then
It's like, in the days leading up to the marathon, as long as it's not throwing your gut completely for a loop, you're fine.
exactly. And nighttime, I'll do pasta. Just pasta and some tomato sauce, or pasta and like a little tiny bit of olive oil, and eat that the night before. That's been like my go-to race, day before the race for a bunch of years, and it's always really worked for me. It is literally just simple carbs. I don't add anything else in. In my nutrition carb loading plan, I do have the option to eat protein with that if I wish, or to eat something with that if I wish, but I don't. I usually do cut out the protein and just replace the protein with a little bit more carbs, because I just know that that's going to be really safe on my stomach and I'm going to feel great for the next day. And not to mention, like, of course, we want to, top off the famous glycogen stores and make sure that we've got enough glycogen stores in our muscles and our liver and ready to go, kind of ready for race day, because not just what you do on race day, right? It's the day to day. So if you show up to the race, fueled with carbs and super hydrated, then you should be, you're already a punch above everybody else, right? You're a couple of tiers above everybody else who may not be as prepared nutritionally. So it's kind of like that. That's how I see the carb load, and I do feel like it's important, and it does make me feel great, whether it's making me feel really great physically, and also the placebo effect of thinking I'm taking all these carbs in, I'm super strong, I'm going to have a ton of energy on race day. So everything kind of works together to make me feel really strong on race day. Do you also do something similar, Michael? I want to hear.
I mean, I'd say first, again, you've got all these weeks to practice.
Yeah.
You might as well try a few different things.
Yeah.
I mean, not, especially if you're like us, a civilian in the grand scheme of things, in terms of, you're not a pro runner. You got a life to live. You got dinners to attend. You got family meals to go to. You got special occasions, birthdays, whatever. You're occasionally going to eat like a steak the night before a long run, as I did a few weeks ago.
Oh boy.
And you don't feel great. It's it usually, I have like an oddly kind of hollow feeling when I'm running my long run after I've had a very kind of meat heavy meal the night before. And it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. You just get through it. Mm-hmm. But it's a good sign that you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to go for like steak frite the night before my goal marathon. I think that's not going to work out. That's well established for me. You might be different, although you're probably not, like the average person listening.
Right.
And so I would say try a bunch of different things. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't do a carb load before a long run. I mean, you can give it a shot if you've never done one before. You want to give it a shot and see how it feels. By all means, do so in practice. But try maybe a pasta or something like that with a little bit of protein and maybe a little bit of veg added as well, and see how your body reacts to that. See if everything is good the next day. And if that's the case, then like that's something you can incorporate. I myself, so this is my approach. Thursday. Okay, marathon's on Sunday.
Okay.
Thursday afternoon, it's like, this is part of like my ritual. And it's one of the little things that I love about marathon training is you create these little kind of like routines, these little rituals that you go through that that are part of telling you like, this is a thing I'm doing. It's a big deal for me. And I am going to carry out this element of the ritual now. And so for me, I've been running marathons since 2010. So this is like year 15, I think, if I'm doing the math correctly, of running marathons. So part of my ritual is at some point on Thursday, when I've got a little bit of time, I steal away a little bit of time and I go to the grocery store and I will go down those center aisles and I'll buy a bunch of my favorite carby snacks.
Yes.
I usually buy, I don't know if they have these in Costa Rica, like Swedish berries, which is just like a gummy bear kind of snack.
Oh, like the Swedish fish?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes,
yeah, I know what
yes.
you're talking about. Yeah.
They're berries. They're berries in Canada.
Oh,
but
okay.
there's the Swedish fish.
Mm-hmm.
I like nibs, so like the licorice kind of candy.
Oh yeah.
I love M&Ms.
Me too.
I make sure I get a nice loaf of bread. And that's my approach. So Thursday night I'll make a carb forward meal, but it's not like pasta with bread with pasta with bread. It's usually kind of a slightly more balanced meal. And then that kind of kicks off the carb load informally Thursday night. I don't overdo it eating wise, just like you. I sort of just replace instead of eat more. And Friday is really the day of focus with carb loading. I think Friday is the key day for a carb load. I try to hit like 8 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram of your body weight at that time, which just equals like a whack load of carbs. It's like a shocking amount of carbs. And you do the math on it, you're like, I don't know if I can eat that many carbs in a day. So you really do have to kind of replace a lot of the variety that you would normally have in your diet with carb-centric food, carb-heavy food. And then you start reading the packaging on stuff and you start Googling like how many carbs are in a banana and all this sort of stuff. Orange juice, bananas, like kind of the healthier side of that instead of just candy. I usually try to take in quite a bit of that as well. Because when you start thinking about like the dynamics of various nutrient absorption, you need a variety of different vitamins and nutrients in order to absorb everything. So I try to still maintain a semblance of variety and normalcy and natural foods, not just Swedish fish the entire time. But like that's what I'm snacking on is like the candy-ish stuff on Friday. So Friday's the serious carb loading day. Friday night, I do a pasta. I add a little bit of protein because I find I need an anchor to my meal to kind of tell my brain this is a meal, and it just kind of helps with my stomach. And so that's my Friday night. And then Saturday, I don't overdo it, but I definitely eat breakfast for breakfast, breakfast for lunch, and then I have a pasta meal for dinner as well. I again will have a little bit of protein with it. I'm not scared of like a basic olive oil based pasta with maybe a bit of chicken in there, like grilled chicken, maybe a couple of vegetables. I'm okay with that, but that's just me. You got to figure that out in practice. That's big pro tip. Figure it out beforehand. Don't take risks the night before your marathon.
No, please. And just something that just to mention it is, even though we're focusing on carbs, a lot of us need to focus on simple carbs and remember to not eat much fiber because we can, if fiber is going to mess with you, again, we're going back to our stomach and digestive needs and your digestive tract. If you overload on fiber, your stomach's not going to have a great time. You definitely don't want to be eating. Most of us are not going to want to be eating fiber before the race. And so just kind of check if you're using, fruit as your carbs. Be careful about which fruits you're deciding to choose to make sure that they're not very high fiber based. And when you're thinking about carbs, you've probably heard so many times, complex carbs are good for you. The complex carbs are the best for you. Yes, they're so good for you, but they often contain much more fiber than the simple carbs. So you want to be careful about your carb choices as well. You're going to eat wheat bread is going to have more fiber, most likely, than white bread. So kind of when you're making those choices, check the nutrition label and If you're sensitive to fiber, which I think most people's digestive tracts are, then just try to hold off on fiber for the couple of days before and not overdo it. I remember that Amby had written in one of his newsletters, he had looked at a recent study that had said that the food that you consume or what you consume is not completely out of your system for 72 hours in most cases, which was something I thought it was a little less than that, to be honest, previously. So this information opened my eyes a little bit to say, okay, Katelyn, not 2 days before, really watch it 3 days before, because you don't want something, what Amby suggested to us is that you don't want something that you ate or drank 3 days before to have an effect on you on race day. So if you just want to be super careful, think about, those 3 days before race day to really take care of what you're consuming.
Yeah. And I would say also, like, you don't have to obsess over timing when you eat all of this stuff, but just stick to your 3 square meals, I would say, especially if you're somebody who eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a schedule, as I more or less do. And I think most people more or less do. And then my one caveat to that would be before race day, before race morning, kind of do the math on when dinner normally would be in terms of like its timing for when you're going to get up the next morning.
Yep.
So if you're running a Chicago Marathon, which starts at 7:00 in the morning, or a Boston, which starts at 10, but you've got to get up as if the race is starting at 7 because you got to take the bus to get to the start line of the Boston Marathon. So like it's like a 5-hour morning before you even get running. You're still up at 5:00 in the morning or whatever time. And so you got to be thinking about the night before. You're really going to kind of want to go to get your meal either at, if it's a travel race, at a restaurant, or if you're making it, say you're staying somewhere where you're able to make a meal and control that yourself. You're kind of going for like the old blue hair special. You're going to go with like the old folks at 4:30 in the afternoon to put your order in for your boring pasta dinner, because you should be eating at 5, because normally you'd be getting up 2 hours later than that. If you eat at 7 or whatever, you got to think about that stuff. And that stuff you just logistically becomes second nature as you become more experienced as a distance runner, especially somebody who, if you travel a lot for races, as I have in the past, but something definitely to consider. And another heads up when we're talking about the carb load, I would say, is be prepared to be marginally disgusted with yourself by Saturday. It's not going to feel right. Someone once said to me, you're not doing carb loading right until you think you're doing it wrong.
So you just feel like it's too much. It's a little too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By that, they meant if you get to a point where you're like on Saturday at around lunchtime and you're ordering pancakes at the restaurant for lunch and you're pouring the maple syrup on, you're eating the pancakes and you're like, I kind of don't want to eat this. This is sort of disgusting. I'm kind of repulsed by maple syrup. You, friend, have succeeded at the carb load. So it's not a matter of like being overstuffed and feeling like I've eaten too much. That's a different feeling. It's more of your body's like, whoa,
this is fun.
I do not need any more energy. This is crazy. Yes, it is crazy, but it's a short-term experience. Your body can handle it. You're not doing any damage. You're stocking up the glycogen stores, as you mentioned before, which is really important in distance running. It's something that you'll thank us for in the last 10 kilometers of your marathon, because that's what it's all there for. Yep. So let's get into race day. Okay. So we've gone through race morning. We've done our 3 hours before the race. We got up some ungodly hour in the morning to drink our fluids, to start hydrating, to eat our very simple carb heavy, simple breakfast, top up our glycogen stores. We're sipping on our carby drink. We're having a little bit of water, maybe we're doing a coffee. And then we're going to the start line of the race. We're Ubering, walking, however you get there, to the start of the race. what's your approach to that? And then what's your approach to like, let's break the race down. So if we're dealing with 26.2 miles, 42 kilometers, we can break it down into kind of like 5 or 10K chunks, right? Let's start with pre-race. Let's start with like the corral. And a lot of these races, you're going to have to get into a corral at some point well before the race starts to get things organized. What's your approach with that? You say you bring a gel. Let's talk a little bit through that.
Yeah, and to be honest, you're going to have a lot more insight in this part than I am, because most of my ultra races, there aren't, a lot of corrals. The couple of marathons that I've run, I guess, have not been as, there haven't been major marathons, so they haven't been so large. I did in Houston have to get into a corral, but there still weren't that many people like these really huge marathons where I think you have to go in a lot of time beforehand. But I would just anticipate that, and depending on how much time you're going to be there, take a little bit extra of what you're going to need with you. So yeah, I take one gel. If it's before an ultra and I'm not going to be running, starting out so fast, I love those. Another thing to take advantage of, to eat those like waffles, honey stinger waffles. I love those.
Those are good.
Those are so good. So I may feel half an hour before a race, I might start getting like a hunger pain in my stomach. Like I might start actually feeling hungry again. That sometimes happens to me. And so if that happens to any of you listening, if the gel just isn't going to kind of help with that, with actually feeling hunger in your stomach, then you might want to think about, okay, this is the last time I'm going to take something like semi-solid or solid, like a couple of energy chews, and let's kind of mention that as a little sidebar, because I think it's important that maybe Michael and I are used to all of these products, but, just to mention like what's out there, right? So checking out the nutrition labels on all of these different products is super important. And we can get a little more into that, but you could be using, I think the most common would be gels for the marathon, because they're just easy to consume. And most of them are more on the liquid side, or you just kind of take them down like a drink. Some are, thicker than others, and they have different consistencies. But I think the gels are what most marathon runners go for. But I have some athletes who they can't get gels down. And so they do take other things. So you want to look at different products, and you want to think about, like chews, or they have like, gummy, like jelly bean type things, that maybe they're not that hard. To me, they got stuck in my teeth and all that. So it's not what I would really like to be taking while I'm running. But perhaps for right before the race, you might opt for one of those more solid options. So you can kind of, if you get hungry, that might help you a little bit. So either take a gel, or I take one of those honey stinger waffles. Both are probably between 20 and 25 grams of carbs right before the race is starting. So it's like basically the same as what I'm going to take, which we'll talk about in a second, what our strategies are, time-based or distance-based, to take that fueling. So something solid if I'm hungry, or a gel if I'm not, but I just want to get those carbs in right before, about 20 minutes before the race starts.
Yeah, I mean, what I tend to do is, especially, I can speak to the major marathon thing for a second here, because that's a bit of a different animal than your local marathon.
Right.
Your local marathon is going to be a lot more chill, unless your local marathon is the New York City Marathon or the Chicago Marathon or Berlin or London. But if it's a local race where you're basically going to be able to walk up to the start line 5 minutes before the race, jump into your corral. Maybe there isn't even a corral. Maybe you just have to walk up to the start line and you go. That allows a lot more flexibility, and it's a lot more relaxed environment and atmosphere, which is a real upside to doing a smaller local race. Now, if you're doing a major marathon, you should do a little bit of research about when your corral closes. So when the last moment is before you can get into your corral to run the race. So make sure you're there with ample amount of time to get into your corral. And that's usually a long time before the race starts. Like sometimes it's an hour before the race starts. So it seems kind of like unfair or cruel, especially if it's a bad weather day. But like in many cases with a major marathon, I'm hanging out with several thousand of my closest friends in a corral for 45 minutes to an hour, like kind of like this, just sort of standing there before the gun goes. So if it's an hour beforehand, I will often take a throwaway bottle. So like I'll think about this in advance. I'll go to a CVS or whatever, a pharmacy or a just a local convenience store, a corner store, and just buy like a 500 ml, like one of these, like bottles of water, a generic bottle of water. And I'll mix up. In my case, I like Morton. So I'll actually take one of the little Morton sachets and I'll pour in the mix, and I'll mix in 500 mils because that's the amount that is required for the mix. I'll mix in 500 mils into a throwaway bottle, and I'll bring that with me. I'll sip on it as I'm making my way to the starting area of the race. And I'll actually bring it with me in the corral, and I'll sip on it a little bit over the course of that time waiting for the race to start. Obviously, two challenges with that. One is, where do you put the bottle? And usually there's a spot, like usually there's kind of an area where you can kind of throw stuff away, and it will be taken care of by the race. Because they'll do a big sweep afterwards anyway, so don't worry about it. You're not littering. And two, what if you need to pee, which is a real challenge. And
good point.
It's tricky. It's really tricky.
Gosh, what do you
seen
do?
A lot of weird stuff. But a lot of urine floating around my feet as I'm standing in the starting corral of major marathons before. And in New York, famously, people pee off the side of the bridge at the starting of the race,
boy.
which is a bit ridiculous. But so it's really tough to get that right. I don't know what to say to you. If you've got a small bladder, it's tricky. I know that in the Boston Marathon, for example, one of the hilarious scenes in the first mile of that race is, after the gun goes, is like this field charges down this hill out of the town of Hopkinton, and then immediately after the initial opening of the race, there's a forest, and like literally like hundreds of people disappear onto the side of the road to pee before the continuing. So I mean that happens, and that's just a reality of running one of these major marathons. Logistics is a very challenging thing. But I have a personal rule, which is I try to get my last porta potty visit in before the cutoff to get into the corral, whenever that is. And I don't drink any fluids up to 30 minutes before.
Okay.
So if the race starts at 6:30 is my personal cutoff. I'm like, no more fluids. That usually allows me to get to the start of the race, to get out of the starting area at the start of the race, and to get moving. And then my body, I just don't need to pee. That's fine after that. So that's like my little like body strategy, my little peeing hack for you there.
These are good tips. These are really good tips, Michael. I wouldn't have even thought about
I've gone
that.
through a lot of mistakes over the years. A lot of like, what do I do? I need to pee so badly.
Yeah.
So that would be my move for a major marathon. Okay. It's just like bring carb infused fluid, bring an electrolyte drink if you don't want it to be too carb heavy at that stage, if you're already topped up. Bring it to the start of the race with you in a throwaway bottle you don't mind losing. There's nothing worse than feeling like you need to bring some like nice water bottle that you brought from home that you don't want to lose. It's game over if you bring that to the start line. You're never going to see it again. So that would be my approach to getting to the start line. And then let's talk about the race. Let's talk about, okay, the race has started. We're at mile 0, first 5 to 10K. What's your recommendations, Katelyn? And what's your approach on how to properly keep your carb stores topped and keep yourself feeling like you've got enough energy to get from mile 0 to mile 26.2 at the end?
Okay, this is what I do. First of all, it's important to calculate how many carbs you specifically need per hour during the race. You're going to have this all figured out, right? Because you would have done it since week 1. As Michael mentioned, you're going to figure that out. You're going to start practicing it. You're going to do trial and error to figure out what works for you, what doesn't. Do I want gels? Do I want gummies? Do I just want liquid? And we have so much stuff we can get into, because then we have to talk about like bringing this stuff with you. But for me, if you want like a general starting point, I like to use the equation of, your weight in kilos is the number of carbs that you should be consuming per hour. That's how I see it. So if I'm 50 kilos, I need about 50 grams of carbs per hour. And that means in total. And this is a starting point, because there are some, I've read some there's some cyclists now taking in, 130, like they are going way above this parameter. for carbs that they're able to handle. And we can talk about that a little more as well. And there are people who can't take their weight in grams of carbs per hour because it's too much for them. So this is just like a starting point. For me, it actually works out very well. It has worked out very well, which is why I do use this equation with a lot of my athletes for them to start out. So if I'm taking 50 grams of carbs per hour, this is going to be the total of everything. So that means whether I'm taking 2 gels, most gels are somewhere between 20 and 25 grams of carbs each, right? So I could be taking 2 gels an hour if I'm drinking water at the aid stations, which in a marathon, I think for me, that would be the easiest because I don't need to carry my liquid with me. You know, if I'm running an ultra, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm consuming other things. So I might be drinking Gatorade or something like that. So, okay, now I can take that Gatorade into consideration into my carb count, right? So maybe I'm only taking 1 gel an hour, but if I'm drinking 500 milliliters of Gatorade an hour or, you know, whatever it would work out to, then I would still end up with my 50 grams of carbs an hour. So if I'm running a marathon, I want it to be as simple as possible. So I'm going to get my water at the aid stations. So that means I'm going to take 2 gels per hour. So I'm going to start, I do time. And that may be because I'm a trail runner, but also if you are not absolutely 100% sure how long you're going to take to run each of those 5K or 3K or whatever K splits, it's going to be tricky for you to do it kilometer or mile wise. I suggest doing it time wise. So I always think in time. It doesn't matter where I am, but I'll take 1 gel starting at 30 minutes. And then hopefully if I can stick onto it, 30 minutes, an hour and 30, 2 hours. So every half an hour, I'll be taking a gel. Seems like a pretty simple strategy. For me, it's taken a long time to figure out what works with my stomach and all of that. And then when I go by the aid stations and I need to hydrate, I'll, grab the cup of water. I won't need to worry that it needs to have calories in it because I've got my gels and, I'll take that down and I'll keep going. Hopefully can plan it that I take a gel kind of right before one of those aid stations would be great if the timing is there because it's always nice to wash that down a little bit with some water. But that's what has worked for me. And I will take that and try to stick to that schedule, calculate the gels ahead of time with how long I think I'm going to take, throw in an extra one just in case I take more time than anticipated. And that's pretty much my strategy for a road marathon. Not thinking about ultras, which is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll stick to the marathon for now. I think one key thing here is, especially for newer runners, especially if you've been carrying the fuel belt, the water bottle, you've been sort of packing both your fuel and your hydration for long runs throughout the entire training cycle. This is your opportunity to free thyself from that. And yeah, you got to bring your gels with you, but you can see this as an opportunity to lighten the load a little bit and to trust what's on course in terms of just getting basic hydration water on the course. A couple of things I would recommend, particularly if you're doing a bigger race, is well in advance of the race, maybe even towards the beginning of the season. Say you've identified that you're going to run, again, the Chicago Marathon is my example because that's what I'm doing. But you're going to run a race and you've got it identified, you've entered, you're committed, you're doing it, and you're doing the full season of training. I mean, usually well in advance, you'll know, especially with a larger race, you'll know what the official fueling partner is on course. You'll know what sort of drink you're getting in addition to water. And often they'll also offer gels and or some sort of other nutrition on course as well. I know for a while there was chews and gels depending on who the sponsor was for that component. But if it's GU, it'll be GU. If it's Morton, obviously. And so if you want to, you can try those products leading into race day when you're doing your long runs and see if they work for you. And you might actually decide, you know what, I'm going to lighten the load a little bit because I know that there's going to be a gel handed out at, 10K, 20K, 30K, 35, whatever, wherever on the course. So you can plot that out and you can be like, I can have 3 less gels with me. Because kind of like, especially if you're running like a 4-hour marathon and most gels are around 25 grams of carbs per gel. You're looking at carrying 8 gels. I mean, if you can make that 5, it just makes it less cumbersome on you, right? Like it's a lot of pockets to carry 8 gels. Yeah. So, or like you have to do the belt thing or whatever. Yeah. So that just makes things easier. I would also recommend, here's 2 other pro tips. 1, carry 1 extra gel than what you plan to take, just in case we've talked about A goals, B goals, and C goals, just in case the A goal does not happen on the day and you've done the math for the A goal, but not the B goal, or maybe do the math for the C goal for how many gels you carry. So you got a little extra on board.
Yep.
Also, when you're moving along, especially if you're not stopping and walking, if you're running as you're carrying on in the marathon and taking a gel at the same time, you might drop one. And there's nothing more soul crushing than thinking that you've lost some valuable energy by dropping it on the ground, and you don't want to turn back. And maybe it's a huge field of people around you and it gets trampled and whatever. It's good to have an extra gel on board. Here's my approach to taking a gel mid-run. Okay. So first thing I do is, first aid station I see, let's say we're running a major marathon. Well, again, we'll stick with the Chicago or New York example, but pretty much any marathon of any size is kind of all the same. You're going to get the first hydration station, the first aid station, pretty early in the race, probably earlier than you need to take your first gel. So what I tend to do is I would eyeball the station and see how they structure it. Is it electrolyte, is it carby electrolyte drink first, then water? Or is it vice versa? Because you're going to need to know that if you're taking a gel. So then when you're coming into, say you say you're really organized, Katelyn, as you will be, I'm sure. You'll have it programmed into your watch. It's going to beep at 30 minutes. Yeah. It's going to be like, take your first gel, Katelyn. You're like, all right, I'm going to take my first gel. Next station, what I do is I would take the gel out, eyeball the station in the distance, open the gel, put the plastic back in where you got the gel from. Don't throw it on the ground. Although I think if you're around a station, it's okay to leave the package because it's going to get swept up, because those areas will get cleaned, just not in between. Just thinking in terms of taking care of your own business on the course, right? So I open it up, and as I'm entering into the aid station, before I enter the aid station, I take my first bit of gel. Okay. I'm running along. I don't walk. I don't stop. I'm running along. It's also, there's serious aid station etiquette as well. It's I identify that there's no one coming up right on my shoulder. So if I slow down or speed up or whatever, I kind of know where I'm at. I take a little bit of the gel. I enter into where the water is being handed out, not the Gatorade. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to be taking a double dose of carbs, get the water person. As I'm approaching the person with the cup that I want to take the water from, they're doing the cup balance thing. I point at the person and I make eye contact and I nod my head. And then I put my hand out and we do the handoff. It's like when you see fighter jets fueling mid-air. It's I come and then I'm making eye contact. I'm grabbing the cup from them. I try to do it sort of early in the row of volunteers that are handing out the water, so that if I drop one, or if the person gets nervous, which happens often, they'll get weirdly nervous if they've never done it before, and they'll kind of sometimes they'll move their hand away at the last second and you just don't get the cup. So then you get an opportunity to look at another person, eye contact, point, grab one. I grab the cup. I've got a bunch of the gel in my mouth. I pinch the cup so that the cup is closed. Okay. So that the water's not flying everywhere. Because it's kind of pointless if you're shooting water all over the place and then you look at your cup and you're like, oh, I've got nothing to actually wash this gel down with. And that's gels are not really typically designed to be consumed without any fluid. Right. So I have the cup pitched. I exit the the aid station area, so I'm out of the mess. And then I take a sip out of the end. It's like a sippy cup. I take a sip out of the water, but I keep it pinched and I wash it down, take another bit of the gel, take a sip, do as many as I need. And then I either roll the gel up and shove it in my pocket with one hand, or if I'm still in the aid station area, chuck the gel in an area where I know it's going to get swept up because I don't want to litter. And then with the last bit of water, what I'll do is I'll actually give myself a little bird bath. I'll actually wash my hands.
Okay.
And then I'll toss the cup after that. And then I carry on. And there you go. There's a successful consumption of an entire gel. And I would say beyond that, listen to your body, listen to your stomach. If you feel like you're overloaded and you've got too much in your system, don't force it. Mm-hmm. And if your plan is, though, and you've practiced to take this many gels over the course of a marathon, stick to your plan, right? So that you don't regret it with 10K to go and you start feeling awful and you're like, I should have taken those gels. But I also I wouldn't be consuming huge amounts of fluid and kind of going overboard if you don't feel good either. So listen to your body as well. There you go. There's my approach
awesome
to taking a gel.
I love it. Yeah. And the pinching of the cup was so important. Didn't have that tip for the first marathon. Gatorade all over myself, just like a sticky mess, the whole rest of the race. So that is key, right? Pinch that cup so you got a little sippy cup going. That's perfect.
There's nothing more hilarious than seeing, it's sad hilarious than seeing someone taking a cup, running and trying to drink, and then just orange or red shit going all over their face, and it's just they've got a beautiful white singlet on, and it's just covered,
ruined.
Yeah. So yes, that's the pro way of getting through an aid station.
Yep.
Consuming a gel. Okay.
Mentioning a couple of key, just kind of playing off that a little bit, which might not be so obvious to everyone. Think about how you're going to carry these gels. And so, as Michael mentioned, there are a couple of different options, right? They have the flip belt, which is one of those very tight against the body with a bunch of little pockets that you can stick a whole bunch of gels in. And if you need to if you're traveling for a marathon, you need to put, a key or something in there, you've got a little space, but it's something that's not going to be very cumbersome and mess around, it's not going to be too much. Also, and maybe this is from my trail running side, I have, the Strider shorts. I think they're like Patagonia shorts, and they have literally 8 pockets in them. And so, in the waist belt of those shorts, and I'm sure there are a ton of brands that have those, but you may not at first think of that. And you buy, your running outfits and your training. And then later you're like, wait a second, where am I going to put my stuff? And so it's just another thought of, sticking them in the pockets of shorts and buying shorts or having tights that actually have that option. So you have a place to put them and practice that so it's comfortable. A little bit of a mistake that I made, and it was actually, it's kind of a tip. And then it's kind of to warn you about not doing it too much. When I was training for the marathon in May, I was running routes for my very, very long runs where I could have a little cooler on my car. And so I would leave my stuff there and I would pick it up and I would just run by it, grab it, and then do another 5K loop, run by it, grab it, a different 5K loop, and have the car as a point of contact there where I would be able to pick up water and leave stuff and all of that. So yeah, it's great because if you have the option of, like Michael mentioned, all the products that they're going to have at the marathon are things that you can use and you don't need to carry anything, then it's perfectly fine. But if you will need to carry your gels and such, about a few weeks before, I was like, wait a second, I should start practicing how this is going to feel on me. How are these gels going to feel in my pockets? Am I going to chafe because I'm going to have gels in my back pocket? So these
huge question.
Yeah, right. So these things that might not come up, that I'm hoping that's why Michael and I are putting all this information together for you, because it's things that maybe you won't take into consideration or it won't even occur to you until it's too late. So things like that. Yeah, it's great to have that kind of aid station during your long runs, But also remember that you want, especially your peak runs and your longest long runs, to really feel like a race simulation. So you want to make sure that whatever you're going to do on race day, you're going to do that day. You've heard it a million times, but something as simple as putting the gels in your pockets and figuring out how you're going to carry that is one of my tips, to just make sure that you really have it all set up and the strategy ready to go before race day.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than discovering, 20 miles into a marathon that where your gels sit in your shorts are burrowing a hole into your hip.
Yes, exactly.
And that happens. Yeah. Thousands of little tiny scrapes from a piece of plastic turn into one gigantic mess by the end of a marathon.
Absolutely.
So, don't do what I've done in the past. Yeah, I would also say for sure, if you, again, to the practice thing, what I've seen over the years is, and I think this is a really smart way of doing things, is you can even go out and buy a whole bunch of different products. This is kind of a fun challenge for yourself, is go to your local running retail shop and go to the wall of food, of race nutrition, and just buy a bunch of different products. Buy Goo, buy Morton, buy Honey Stinger, buy whatever. And UCAN is another one that is kind of an interesting one that's popped up in the US as well, which is like a little bit more of a viscous gel. It's a little easier to swallow. It's like a little bit more watery. They're bigger pouches because obviously like they need to be bigger because they're very watery, but they're easier to get down. Whereas Goo is like pretty gooey and it's kind of hard to get down.
It's pretty sticky and thick. Yeah. And what about Cis too? I've heard of that one. I haven't tried it, but
I've not tried that.
Okay.
Either.
Yeah.
But again,
out there.
This is one of these things where it's like, if you've got a little bit of money to spend and you are willing to be a bit experimental on your long runs, I would go out and buy 5 or 6 different products, buy enough for each long run. And then over the course of, 5, 6, 7 weeks of your marathon training, each week, try a different product and see how it feels, see how it goes down, see how you like the texture and the taste in your mouth. These things are really important because you're going to consume, if you're consuming, say, 6 or 8 gels in a marathon, you don't have to love it. It doesn't have to be your favorite thing. It's not something that you're going to be necessarily needing to crave in life, but you need to be able to get it down, especially under stress and the last hour of a marathon. You're going to need to feel comfortable consuming it. So if it's something where it feels tacky and heavy in your mouth and you're having a tough time swallowing it in a long run, I would say maybe it's not a good fit, right? I would also say a good thought process is, can I swallow it in worst case scenario without water?
Yes.
And if you can do that, usually you're in good hands with that product. It's a good fit for you. So like for me, Morton is a pretty good product because it's like got a jelly consistency to it, which I find a little weird.
It's weird.
And I think maybe may throw some people off because it's like, I don't know, like consuming, I don't want to put this in people's head. It's like kind of like consuming sugary caviar to a degree. If you've ever had caviar,
okay.
It's got bubbles to it. Or like, it's like kind of like a big clump of bubble tea or something. But I find it's actually pretty easy to swallow whole if I don't have any fluid. So I'm okay with a Morton gel. It works. Whereas like I can't do Goo. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people that love Goo. Yeah. I think Goo's a good product. I'm not shitting on Goo, but for me, it's like
it's thick.
Too much.
It's thick. It's thick. It's harder. I actually even go
thick and firm.
Even more liquidy than Martin, because right now I'm taking the power gels and they are basically liquid. So it's almost like just drinking, and it just makes it easier for me, and I don't feel like it's tacky. No, a Goo, I'd like to, have one of the birthday cake ones as dessert. That would be fine.
Yes.
Nice that they have like all these delicious like dessert flavors that I want to eat. But when I'm running a race, I try to go for something a little more liquidy. And so if you're looking for something like that, the power gels are very liquidy, and the honey stingers are liquidy as well. for that kind of consistency. So if you're looking for that, those two are ones that I've tried that are easier to kind of like drink instead of eat.
And on that, I mean, we're getting down to we've talked this thing into the ground now. I think we're pretty comprehensive on things. Like, let's cover off a couple of other things.
Okay.
A big question obviously is hydration. How do you know if you're hydrated? You can overdo it. It's called hyponatremia. It's very dangerous. It's when you drink too much fluid, particularly if you're just consuming water. And you're actually, what happens is you're basically like flushing the electrolytes out of your system because you're drinking too much fluid.
Yep. And
then you become deficient in electrolytes, but you've got quite a bit of fluid in your system. So you think you're hydrating, but in fact, you're causing hyponatremia, which can be very dangerous. It's pretty rare. It's hard to do that, but it can happen if you're just chugging tons and tons of water in the lead up to the race and during the race. So be careful about that. Rule of thumb, in the days leading up to the marathon, if you want to stay hydrated, your pee shouldn't be necessarily be clear. Let's talk about
pee instead, because it seems better.
I was thinking about my pee just before we started this pod. I was actually, because I'm going to do a longer midweek run. It's not a long run, but I'm going to run about 20 kilometers after we're done this podcast.
It's a long run.
It's a fairly long run, so I need to be hydrated. I'm I'm running 20 miles, so 32K for my long run right now. But I like to do I'm a volume person.
Yes,
I do
you are.
A lot of running. So I keep an eye on how hydrated I am, right? So I just make sure it looks lemony and light yellow. It's not dark. That means you're dehydrated. If it's there, you got to fix the hydration a little bit. If it's clear, you're probably slightly overhydrated, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Generally when you start peeing more regularly, and especially race morning, you're nervous, you probably consumed a lot of fluid because you're like, I don't want to underdo it. So you kind of overdo it a little bit, and you'll notice your pee starting to get a little bit clearer. It's okay. It's all right. That happens to me as well. It's not the end of the world. Just make sure you haven't drank 4 liters of just water before your race. That's a bad idea.
I think it's a good idea to just add some of those electrolytes in there if you can. Just not, like I was mentioning before, the Propel packets, there are a ton of different products that you can give a try to, and they don't have to have calories. So you can just be adding some sodium in there and getting some electrolytes into your hydration in general, which I'll take it during the day, just overall when I'm training hard. Because I feel like, especially with where I live, again, the climate, the humidity, I'm always hot. I'm always sweating. So I feel as though I don't just need to keep taking just a ton of water, and I need electrolytes as well. But there are, Nuns out there. There's, tons of different stuff like powder packets, electrolyte drinks, Gatorade Zero, Powerade Zero, ton of stuff that you can be taking to stay hydrated, but just make sure that you're getting the sodium and the other electrolytes in there that you need, in general. Now, if you are someone who feels like you're really having a hard time figuring it out, because almost with all things running, trial and error and practice makes perfect is our rule number 1, right? So am I going to need to take salt stick, pills, or do I really dehydrate to that level where I need to add, salt pills to my nutrition while I'm running a marathon or while I'm running a race? These are big. These are for, people who are really salty sweaters, who are really dehydrated. Why am I familiar with this? Because here in Costa Rica, we have people who really need to add that into their regimen because we're sweating, a couple of liters an hour in, some parts of the day. So you've got to kind of think about that. The climate or the weather that day is going to make a big difference. The humidity is going to make a big difference. The heat. There are, you can take the normal sweat test to just kind of figure out how much you sweat on a normal run, right? So just the quick instructions of the sweat test is, before you get dressed, weigh yourself, get dressed, go for an hour run, don't drink, don't pee, come back, take all your wet clothes off, wring out your hair if it's soaking wet, get back on the scale, see how much you sweat. Okay, that's pretty much how much you're sweating per hour of running. That's also going to change on intensity. So if you want to run that hour, at race pace to see how much you're sweating at a race pace instead of at an easy pace. So you can take a sweat test. There are also certain sodium concentration tests that you can also take. So if you feel like you're a really salty sweater and you just want more information, there are ways that you can take, this lab test to figure out how much sodium you are losing per hour as well. And so that's something that you could also track if you feel like this is going to be an issue. Like Michael said, the easiest way to do it is just say, is my pee light yellow? I'm hydrated. I'm good to go. But if you're not feeling well and you think that you might be having some issues with dehydration, it might be something that you want to just kind of test and figure out. And there was a product that we saw at the running event last year. Do you know what I'm talking about, Michael, with the patches?
Yeah, the NIX biosensor. It's a green and black logo. They've actually sent both Alex and I product to test, which we're getting to it. I promise you, NIX, we're getting to it.
Oh, cool.
Lovely people and interesting product. Pretty advanced product. Certainly something that, like, if you're uncertain about whether or not your sweat rate is affecting you in a negative way, if you're going to be doing an event that's like fairly hot, or even if you're just running a marathon where, like, this is a great example, actually. Another pro tip here is that, like, if you're running, say, the Boston Marathon or any other spring race where the climate sort of hinges in that moment in the spring, and it goes from being, especially the Northeast United States, it goes from being cold and wintry and snowy and crappy for several months. And then often at Boston, you get like a day where it's a great day to watch the race on the side of the road, but not such a great day to be finishing the Boston Marathon because it gets hot and sometimes it's a bit humid. And even if it's only like 18 degrees Celsius, and it's in the, high 60s Fahrenheit towards the end of the race, for someone who's just spent the entire winter training in the snow, that's really cold, really hot, right? That's like a shock to your body, and your body may overreact and sweat more. So it's one of these things where, like, if you understand your sweat rate and you want to get really kind of nitty gritty about it, a product like NIX Biosensor is probably a good one to look at. And it's cool stuff that just, like, this is stuff that only, like, bleeding edge technology that only elites had access to up until very recently. So, hey, if you've got the funds for it, because it's obviously not a free product, and you want to kind of go in the weeds on the nitty gritty of the science of things, this is at your fingertips. It's something that you can use to get a better sense of what kind of sweater you are. I know I'm a big sweater.
I am too.
And yeah, we both are. And we've talked about this in the past.
We've talked about this.
And so it's something where you have to be mindful of it. And I also would say that your body, if it's over, say, 10 or even 10 or 12 degrees Celsius, what's that in Fahrenheit?
In the 50s, 50 something, I think. Yeah.
If it's over that on race day, your body will start to exponentially be challenged by the heat, and particularly by the humidity. A marathon in the 70s is very hard on your body, and in the 80s, it's like, forget it.
And Boston can get into the 80s. I've seen it happen. I've seen people dropping like flies for dehydration. Hot Boston.
Yes. Yeah. The hot Boston years. So, something to consider, and you have to adjust your hydration plan on course accordingly. And it just turns, if it's a really bad race and you really want to get it finished and it's extremely hot and humid, it just turns into a survival quest where you're just like hitting every aid station and just listen to your body and, make sure you're consuming electrolyte drinks so that you don't suffer from hypernatremia, as we talked about before. All right. I think we did it. Is there anything else?
I don't know. I'm thinking.
My head is spinning.
It is. I just think maybe just to add on to what you mentioned about trying out all this different stuff. Of course, remember, you won't remember everything. So it's kind of important to track it if you're new to this and say like, oh, this works like this. And I felt great with this. My stomach bugged me a little bit. Just kind of like track it, log it. A lot of runners, we are those type of people. We're that type of people that likes to take a lot of notes. Yes. And we have a lot of spreadsheets and we like to, keep track of what we're doing. So this is just another thing that you can track kind of your nutrition and hydration, see how it went, analyze it, make adjustments, and then try again for your next long run to kind of just perfect it as much as you can. Remember from what we said from the DNF podcast, we said, control the controllable. This is one of the things that we can control because we can practice it and we can perfect it until we get our strategy right. I mean, it doesn't mean on race day something's not going to happen. Like, remember my story about Houston, I couldn't open my gels because I didn't have the right gloves and my hands were freezing and I just couldn't manipulate it well. I wasn't prepared. But most of the time we're going to be able to control this. So just one of those things that we can, practice makes perfect. It sounds cliche, but it's very true. So, but no, Michael, I think we really took a deep dive into this. And, you guys can always leave us questions in the comments if maybe there's something we didn't cover that we would be happy to get back to you about.
By all means, and we'll answer. We did a mailbag podcast. Was it last week?
Yeah, that was fun. Feels
like forever ago. And we have a few lingering questions actually that we didn't get to in the mailbag that we'll have to get to it in a future mailbag. But if this type of subject creates more questions than perhaps even the answers we've provided today. So obviously feel free to reach out to us. If you're watching this, we do a YouTube video version of the podcast. Leave a comment there. Spotify now allows for comments. So you just comment if you're listening to the pod via Spotify. You can email us at hi@marathonhandbook.com, hi@marathonhandbook.com, and we'll get back to you, or ping us at our social media channels. All sorts of ways of getting hold of us.
Yep.
I've successfully avoided talking about how I specifically do in-race fueling, but I'm happy about that because I am the outlier, Katelyn. I don't take anything.
Please
I don't take anything.
Don't listen to Michael, everyone.
Don't take anything.
Unless you're like super, super, super experienced and that works for you. Remember though, if it works for you, then there's always an exception to the rule. And Michael, you are an exception to the rule.
I front load and I practice not taking anything for the entire season, which creates quite a few like tough long runs in the middle of the summertime at the very beginning of when you start getting into 20 milers. It's like the first 20 milers, I'm like, this is going to hurt. And then I do it and then I get used to it. And it's not that I don't do anything. I front load all of my hydration and front load all of my carb intake. So like I'm taking in all of that fluid and those carbs in the 3 hours before I go out and run and then expelling them throughout the run. And my body's gotten used to it over the years. And when I run a marathon, like I'll run Chicago this year, I'll bring 1 or 2 gels as like backup, but I never use them. I have gels that I have a Morton gel that I haven't used in like 3 marathons because it just like keeps traveling. It's expired.
It's probably
now.
expired, Michael. Throw that away.
Yeah. So I tell myself if I feel like I need to take it, especially I do a check-in at like 20 miles, which is the crucial hinge point in the race where really, if you're going to start to bonk in a marathon, it's usually around 30 to 32 kilometers, around 20 miles. You start your body after about a 2-hour period. For me, for most people, your body starts to, tell you whether or not you've been good to it. And I will take a little bit of fluid. Starting usually like maybe 10K, usually not, usually 20K. Start sipping a little bit of water just to keep my mouth rinsed. And then I'll do we never talked about the central governor theory, which is, you can find it in Tim Noakes, who is a exercise physiologist from South Africa, controversial figure for a lot of different reasons about his theories on various things with sports science and other things, including, I think, vaccines. So I'm not going to get into it. But he wrote this book called The Lure of Running, which is this like massive, like 1,000-page book exploring all of the science of endurance sports and running. And one of the sort of proven studies that popped up about 15 years ago was, I think it was even a study that was maybe even funded by Gatorade. So this was kind of shocking, but basically took a group of endurance athletes, had one group drinking sport drink, the other group taking the sport drink in, swishing it around in their mouth and spitting it out. So not actually consuming the carbohydrates. And they performed at the same level. So
That's crazy.
This sort of, this out of that developed what's called the central governor theory, just like with a car. Your car might go over 120 miles an hour, but like there's a governor on it that stops it from going faster than that. And our brains have the same sort of governor placed where it's like you can go 90, 92, 95% of your all out effort in an endurance event, but your brain is going to tell your body like you're getting too close to 100. Things are getting scary. No. Stop. Yeah. And then the hack, the workaround to unlock the central governor theory, to unlock the central governor is to take a little bit of some sort of carb, sport drink, food, whatever, send the signals to your brain. It's coming. And then you spit it out. And then the brain's like, oh, cool. Got some sport drink coming. We're good to go. We don't have to like tamp down on things. Yeah. So I do a little bit of that in the second half of the race. It's more just like part of the ritual, part of the thing I've always done. It's always worked for me. I've had some pretty good success with marathons. I've done a lot of even and negative split marathon running, and I know kind of my goal time going in. So haven't really ever had a huge bonk in a race, like where I was fuel depleted. So for me, this is something that works for me, but I know that I'm front loading a lot of those carbs and a lot of that hydration beforehand. It's not that I'm not taking anything.
Right.
But that's how I like to approach it. I'm like a camel out there on the course.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. But it's great. I mean, if
carrying my load with me.
Your metabolism, your energy systems are just amazing that you can handle that. You must be metabolizing fat like as well, like I don't know, like a machine. That's awesome.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I also do a lot of volume. I also run a lot.
Yeah.
Too, so
that's awesome.
You know, and I know that's not what everyone's doing. Anyway, so I guess there you go. I revealed my own personal approach, but this is, again, I'm running a marathon well under 3 hours. I've been doing this for 15 years. A lot of trial and error. And I practice what I'm doing throughout the course of several weeks, several months of training leading up to it. So it's what I'm accustomed to. It's not what I recommend everyone do. Stick to the overwhelming science. Do what gives you confidence. All right. That's it, Katelyn. We did it.
We did it.
We covered marathon fueling.
Oof, that was a big one.
Yeah. If I screw up the Chicago Marathon fueling, man, we're going to have a good laugh.
Oh,
okay.
You have to deliver now on this zero fuel thing.
Pressure is on. Good thing the running has been going well.
Yes.
Okay. So make sure to follow us on socials. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got Alex. He's going to have, I cannot wait to see.
I know.
Alex Sear in the Alps.
Trail running. I can't believe
Trail
it.
running.
Track. I can't wait.
Yeah. It's going to be great.
Yep.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for that. And for like a bunch of gear reviews, shoe reviews. We've got a whole bunch coming up. Alex has got a lot of stuff in the hopper. And our newsletter comes out 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, 5:05 Eastern time in the morning. And it's how you can find all the latest stuff we're doing, all the news coverage we're doing, all the live coverage we're doing for certain events. I'm in the process right now of planning our fall slate of coverage. It's crazy. So subscribe to that. And all right, Katelyn, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
See you soon.